Welcome back to Specimen the Sociologist. This is your host, Jessamyn Reichmann. Now, as you may know, my name rhymes with specimen, but with a J, and I am a budding sociologist who is on one simple mission, and that is to figure out the science behind our social lives and how it can be used to stabilize our social interactions. Without further ado, let's dive into today's episode, the sociology behind loneliness. Per tradition, we are going to kick off this episode with a spotlight. This is an opportunity to highlight independent artists or small businesses that are ready to share their gifts with the world. Today's spotlight shines on Bonhomie Coffee, a Haitian specialty pop-up bar that is not only magical, but also Black, queer, and woman-owned. A few Sundays ago, my dear friend and I visited, and from the moment we arrived, the vibes were immaculate. DJ Chuck was spinning, Jamaican beef patties were warming up in the oven, and my Haitian mocha was being made with pure love. The service and drinks, they were amazing, but the real treat was the crowd. You had an eclectic mix of Seattle producers, techies, bartenders, and your local neighborhood aunties and uncles. Now the conversations flowed as freely as the coffee did, which made for an amazing Sunday afternoon. So, the next time that you're looking to scratch that caffeine kick, be sure to check out Bonhomie Coffee. The Instagram handle is linked in today's bio. Spotlight aside, let's dive back into the world of sociology. In today's episode, we are using anomie theory to explore the current epidemic of loneliness. We'll unpack the science behind it and how it subtly shows up in our everyday behavior. By the end of this episode, my goal is for you to walk away with a science based perspective on loneliness, tools to build meaningful relationships, and what it really means to live your most authentic life, even in a disconnected world. So turn the volume up and let's get to learning. So, what is loneliness? And we'll just start with this. Loneliness is a huge topic. It can be viewed through many lenses, whether where a person lives geographically or their socioeconomic status or even their mental health. But for today, we are focusing on loneliness from a social and structural standpoint. With that being said, what is loneliness and how prevalent is it in our society? Loneliness is a distressing emotional state that arises when there's a gap between the level of social connection you want and the quality connection that you're actually experiencing. More importantly, it's less about being physically alone and more about the perception of social isolation. That's why you can have a person who is the life of the party or has a very vibrant social life, yet they still feel lonely. And on the other hand, you can have someone who lives a somewhat more solitary lifestyle, but they don't experience loneliness at all. Because again, it's not about how many people are around you, it's about whether you feel as if your social needs are being met in those relationships. Now, when I say social needs, I mean the need for genuine, intimate connections that are rooted in trust, emotional support, and security. But let's be honest for a second. Do you have a relationship where you can freely be yourself without tensing up or adjusting your behavior? Can your boyfriend tell from your tone when you are stressed, overwhelmed, or perhaps extending the truth? Or better yet, is there any person who knows everything about you, and yet it moves them to care for you even more passionately? Now, the whole point of me asking those questions is to have you understand that loneliness does not stem from a lack of social connection or opportunities. Rather, it stems from there being a gap between your relationships and your social needs. So, with that being said, while loneliness is an emotional state, I would argue that our social behavior can perpetuate that state of mind. And here are a few subtle ways that I believe loneliness can show up in our everyday life. Fresh out the gate, we have social rigidity or cynicism. Now, if you're human, you have been hurt before, and that's just the nature of humanity. However, I found that people can quickly develop rigid beliefs, such as people can't be trusted, or no one really understands me, or my next relationship won't work out because the last one didn't, as a defense mechanism. And it's these beliefs that shut down our ability to be more open and vulnerable and perhaps can perpetuate behaviors of loneliness. Next, I would argue that loneliness can be reflected in high social media usage. Now, just because you are observant of a person's life online does not mean that you are an active participant, thus leading to feelings of disconnection that can only be amplified with excessive social media usage. Next, I would suggest that loneliness can be reflected in a person's social overcompensation or performance. Because keep in mind, in an effort to fill the gap between your needs and the quality of relationships that you're experiencing, it's kind of easy to fall into the social behavior of people pleasing or being agreeable. And I mean, it is the express lane of building social capital, but I would argue that if you go too fast, it can only turn into emotional burnout or service level relationships. But again, it can reflect a form of loneliness. And last but not least, I would say that loneliness can present itself in the form of dishonesty. I mean, it's so easy, again, to fall into the trap of ritualized greetings, where a person asks you, "How are you?" And your immediate response is, "I'm good." Or even worse, you talk only about the tip of the iceberg, aka your current situation, without diving deeper into context or asking for help. Now, hopefully, these examples illustrate how loneliness subtly influences our social behavior and keeps us stuck in cycles of disconnection between our social needs and the quality of relationships. But let's not only talk behavior, let's talk numbers. Over the past 4 years, researchers at Harvard Graduate School of Education, Making Carey Common project, have been exploring the root causes of loneliness. In May 2024, they partnered with YouGov to conduct a national survey examining how Americans are experiencing and responding to this growing epidemic. And here are some of their key findings. Nearly 21% of participants reported feeling lonely. And what's even more surprising was the age breakdown, where people between the ages of 30 and 44 were the loneliest group, with 29% reporting that they frequently or always felt lonely. But after that age group, we had the 18 to 29-year-olds, where 24% of the participants said that they experienced loneliness. And then in third place, you had the 45 to 64-year-olds, who 20% of them said that they felt lonely. And then it was kind of a surprise to me, but adults 65 and older came in last place with a report of only 10% feeling lonely, which I thought was interesting because I feel like at 65, you lived some life. You probably lost some friends, lost your family members, perhaps lost your parents, but I guess they are the social butterflies of our generation. But with that being said, what's striking is that younger people, despite being the most digitally connected generation and having countless opportunities to either join a run club or a sport team or even live at home with their family members, that they are experiencing some of the most intense feelings of loneliness. But again, this isn't just an emotional issue, it's also a public health crisis. According to the US Surgeon General's 2023 advisory, loneliness is linked to a 29% increase of heart disease, a 32% increase of a person having a stroke, and health effects comparable to smoking up to 15 cigarettes a day. Now, these numbers aren't meant to scare you, but to shine a light on just how serious and how far reaching this epidemic is. But again, the impact doesn't even stop at our individual health. Economically speaking, loneliness is costing the US approximately $406 billion dollars every year, including an estimated $6.7 billion in Medicaid spending. Now, these costs stem from either increased mental health needs, people who experience employee turnover rates, or just higher rates of substance abuse. And while we focused on the US, This issue is also a global one. A 2023 Meta-Gallup survey across 142 countries found that 24% of adults aged 15 and older reported feeling fairly lonely. So let's pause for a second because I knew that I threw a lot of information your way. But if you can take anything from these numbers, let it be this: that loneliness is common, it is real, and it does have serious consequences. However, your favorite specimen is not intimidated by these numbers, and I truly believe that sociology can give us the tools to turn this ship, aka epidemic, right on around. So, away with the numbers and let's get into the sociology behind loneliness. Welcome to the conversation, French sociologist Emile Durkheim. Born in 1858 in the small French town of Epinal near the German border, Durkheim grew up to become a professor at the Sorbonne in Paris. During this time, France was rapidly transforming from a traditional agricultural society into an urban industrial economy. However, what became the primary focus of Durkheim's entire scholarly career was what the economic system was doing to people's mental health and how it was quite literally driving them to suicide in increasing numbers. In his 1897 work, Le Suicide, Durkheim chronicled how suicide rates increased as nations industrialized and consumer capitalism took hold. But his focus on suicide was really a window into a broader, more widespread social despair. Suicide, he argued, was just the visible tip of a much deeper iceberg of emotional and societal distress. In another body of work titled The Division of Labor in Society, Durkheim introduces the Anomie theory, which will be our anchor theory for today's podcast. Now, the Anomie theory is the idea that during rapid social or economic change, the breakdown of values that guide individual behaviors perpetuates. Because keep in mind, in traditional rural communities, people shared beliefs, traditions, and there were clear roles that were defined. But with industrialization came a shift towards more complex, specialized roles, and a society built more on transaction and less on connection. Therefore, a byproduct of the division of labor is the growing disconnection between our social needs and personal relationships. And again, this stems simply from the change in nature of how we socialize. But while Durkheim was referencing the first industrial revolution, let's apply his theory to the fourth industrial revolution. Now, in case you didn't know, the fourth industrial revolution refers to the ongoing transformation of society through emerging technologies, such as artificial intelligence, robotics, the Internet of Things, and biotechnology. For example, whether it's the fact that everyone has a handheld device in their hand, or when you go to the grocery store and you no longer check out with a cashier, but rather it's self checkout, or even now with Amazon delivery, 2 days. You never run into your local mailman ever. It's in these subtle ways that blur the line between the physical, digital, and biological worlds, therefore reshaping how we live, work, and interact. Which has me thinking, if the first industrial revolution led individuals to suicide, how is the fourth industrial revolution leading us to loneliness? Well, let's talk about a few of its characteristics, shall we? First is the big kahuna, and that would be technology and social media. While they have connected us in incredible ways, they often give the illusion of connection while reducing real, in person interaction. Deep relationships are built in small, everyday moments. For example, whenever I run into Lumerm, who is the owner of Mojito, a small Latin restaurant based here in Seattle, he always picks me up and he spins me around, whether it's in the grocery store or on the street. And sure, he follows my Instagram account, but it doesn't account for meaningful interactions such as that. And while technology may elicit a sense of community, Again, it cannot compensate for the daily space that a person occupies. Second would be the nature of work. When society transitioned from a simple to complex workforce, it shifted how we placed value on our relationships. Instead of viewing our work relationships as personal, we shifted to viewing these relationships as mere transactions, and we call it dun, 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 professionalism. Now, the issue with this perspective is that we don't actually create a culture that allows a person to exist beyond just their job function. Over time, that erodes a sense of self and belonging, which I would say can lead to feelings of alienation and loneliness. Next would be the cultural shift towards individualism. And I don't know if this shift is solely associated with the fourth wave of industrialization, but it is a key aspect of our current culture. And the downfall of individualism is that it credits success to personal effort, not luck or community. And honestly, I think that's the biggest pile of poo that I ever heard. When we overlook the invisible web of support that surrounds us, it can produce self reliance and honestly, a form of glorified loneliness. Because I think of my closest friends who wrestle with loneliness, and it often presents itself in them having this internalized pressure to quote unquote always have it together, or who often downplay their needs by just dealing with the situation. So on the outside, they may appear high functioning, but on the inside, they may feel isolated, exhausted, or quietly overwhelmed. However, we are going to flip the narrative. Despite the division of labor streamlining our roles and routines, it doesn't have to strip away the intimacy of humanity from those interactions. If anything, I would argue that every social interaction is a seed that grows into a stronger community, meaning you don't have to work in the same field as a person to emotionally connect with them or spend 40 hours a week with a person to bond over a shared belief. So, let me tell you a little story that captures exactly what I mean. As you may know, I'm gearing up to apply in the next cycle for a PhD in sociology. So, when I'm not recording podcast or editing my writing samples, I work part-time as a banista. And yes, I said banista, not barista. At Amazon's headquarters, there's this cool Airstream trailer that has turned into a full functioning banana stand, where bananas are free to any Amazonian or community member. And what's wild about this program is that it's a multi-million-dollar operation that oversees 6 different stands in 4 different states. And it took your girl 3 rounds of interviews to secure this job. Which I'm like, you would think it's a simple nanner job, but baby, it's still corporate America. Nonetheless, I spend perhaps a day or two a week at the banana stand, queuing up salsa music, handing out bananas, and chatting with thousands of people per week. Now, as a Seattle native and someone with a background in the social sciences, you'd think that I know a few things about Seattleites and people in general. But let's just say this job has humbled me in the most beautiful of ways. When you work on the campus of one of the world's largest tech companies, you'll begin to pick up on the rhythm of business. Amazon is known for having a demanding workload, often placing significant physical and mental strain on its employees due to high productivity expectation and tight performance monitoring, which unfortunately serves as a solid example for Durkheim's argument in Le Suicide and his argument in Anomie theory. And again, as a friendly reminder, Durkheim argues that capitalism leads to unhappiness because the division of labor, while increasing efficiency, also weakens social bonds and creates anomie by isolating individuals and reducing their sense of purpose and connection. Now, it doesn't take extensive research to complement this theory. Rather, it takes one conversation at the banana stand to cement that argument. Because between the hellos and the how are yous, I get hit with heavy conversations that honestly range across the spectrum. whether it's a middle aged Amazonian trying to find purpose in life, to a community member who is working through an infidelity issue in their relationship, to perhaps a wide eyed and bushy tailed intern trying not to drown in their workload. And that's when I learned that the real work was not passing out bananas, rather, it was my ability to turn brief interactions into meaningful moments that would carry beyond the stand. And on that note, let me share one of the more fruitful, get it, fruitful, conversations that I've had with an Amazonian. Now, it was probably like a Tuesday, and it was a cheeky 10 a.m. in the morning, and this gentleman walks up with the biggest smile in his eyes. And for context, he worked at the Amazon offices based in Austin, and he just could not believe the corporate myth that the banana stand was real. And what began as a brief introduction turned into a 45-minute conversation between two strangers. Now, this gentleman began to talk about his role at work, but quickly opened up about his personal life, whether that be overcoming childhood addictions, saving his marriage, and even learning how to be present for his children. He even concluded that despite having financial stability, he still wrestled to find meaning beyond just his profession and his role as a provider for his family. And then here's the fun part, if we're going to use that F word. He decides to flip the story time onto me. And he asks, how do you find purpose in life? Now, keep in mind, people, he's a 40-year-old. I'm in my mid 20s. He's a white guy from out of state, and I'm a black girl from Seattle Central District. He's married, I'm single, he has 6 children, and I have a stuffed Appa from Avatar The Last Airbender. So when he asked me the not so lighthearted question about purpose, I was curious on how I was going to connect my lived experience with his life story. Instead of beginning from the start, aka 1998, I began from when I burned out 2 years ago. And it wasn't because of my corporate position or my demanding family responsibilities, but it really came from just feeling lost. Because as any young person who is trying to prioritize the career and build a sense of financial security, I realized that I began to shift my value to markers of success instead of honoring the original intent behind my actions. And what it revealed was that the burnout wasn't an isolated experience, but it was the iceberg of loneliness that I held internally. If you remember our definition of loneliness, it can be described as a state of emotional distress where there is discrepancy between a person's desired social connection and those needs being met. And I just woke up and realized that I was disconnected from my vision, from my relationships, from my work, from my own social and emotional needs, and not gonna lie, even my faith. So after I resigned from my position, I began the unconventional process of discovering myself all over again. But, anyways, this process consisted of me learning how to show up differently in the areas of my life. So, as I began to reconnect with myself and my friends and the things that cultivated my identity from the beginning, I felt myself falling back in love with people, their social problems, and sociology. And that's when I created Specimen the Sociologist, a platform where people don't have to process their lived experiences in private, rather, they can have a peer, aka me, and science to help aid them in life, anywhere, at any time. Now, the difference between where I was 2 years ago versus where I am now isn't because there's a change in my job title or because of the fact that I'm building this podcast or I'm pursuing my PhD, but rather it's just this deep level of fulfillment that my identity now aligns with my work. So after I said that, we kind of started yapping about some other things, and I don't really know if our conversation solved world peace or if it made a dent in the loneliness epidemic, but I do know that in our shared humanity, we were able to reflect on how our lowest moments turned out to be more purposeful than we had originally imagined. Again, that's when I learned that the real work was not passing out bananas. Rather, it was my ability to turn a brief interaction into a meaningful moment that would carry beyond the stand. And on that note, I want to end this short story time on a somewhat spontaneous and silly note. Because while I've had a lot of heartfelt moments at the banana stand, I've also had some of the silliest moments as well. So here are just a handful. The first would be meeting Barack Obama's sister Maya, which, side note, she is an absolute peach and gives the best hugs in the entire world. But she also was helping me load up my trailer with bananas. And I remember a couple months after we had met, I was like, let me follow up on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn, I know it's meant for professional purposes, but I like to keep it personal. So I messaged her. I said, hey, this is your neighborhood friendly banista. And it was so lovely to meet you and your friends. If you ever find yourself back in the city and you need dive bar recommendations, because again, Seattle's known for its dive bars, or restaurants, or if you're gonna grab a cup of coffee, girl, let me know. And she immediately responded back and she said, that sounds beautiful. This thing applies whenever you find yourself in Hawaii. And now we're just LinkedIn buddies, which is like pretty snazzy. Another amazing aspect of the banana stand is that it's slowly turning me into a polyglot. I mean, there's so many different cultures and ethnicities and heritage just like slide through to pick up a banana that in the process, I'm slowly learning Hindi, Hungarian, French, Spanish, and even Swahili. So if you think you need to travel the world, you don't. You just need to come to the local banana stand and the world will literally come to you. Which, side note, the banana stand also operates not only as a global scene, but as a marketplace. Because around the banana stand, there are 1,000,001 food trucks. And it's really cute because these owners will come and they'll typically pass me two bags, one filled with food and one that is empty. And then they'll proceed to say, I have a gift for you, and you have a gift for me. So we exchange plates of food for bunches of bananas. But I think the funniest moment came. Oh God, it makes me want to giggle every time. But I think the funniest moment that I've had at the banana stand, and I've had a lot, it would be during their day of service. So once a year, Amazon will ask its employees to take a break from their meetings, come outside, put on an orange t shirt, and help with a project. And so that day, they had probably four or five different tents right in front of the banana stand. And so when the MC was helping guide volunteers and began giving her spiel about what they could expect within the next hour, lo and behold came a community member, which again, a community member is a person who lives in the city of Seattle, but they're just hanging out on Amazon's campus. And so in comes this community member who is unhoused. And I don't know what they did to modify their electric wheelchair, but they were coming in hot. Like, I would honestly, if I was a police officer, I would have given them a speeding ticket. But anywho, they started hauling arse across like the plaza straight to the banana stand. And while this dude was coming, he had a lit cigarette in his lap. I don't know how that happened. So you look like Thomas the Train coming out of nowhere. He pulls him to the banana stand. He's like, hey, yo, pass me two bunches. So the stand is somewhat high because, again, it's Airstreamer. So I had to bend over to drop two bunches in his lap. And this dude literally whips his wheelchair around the MC, like the little circle around her, and then hauls ours back to the streets. I've never saw him again. And again, he had a lit cigarette in his lap, and there was smoke coming up from his area. So I'm just like, what the heck? Like, there's just like, you could take life seriously, or you can work a shift at the banana stand and just, love people for where they are. Now, there are countless of other moments that I've had, whether that be helping resolve conflict with Amazonians, or dancing bachata with community members, or even receiving really nice gifts from people, whether that's homemade banana bread or books. Like, while the banana stand is silly and it is spontaneous, it also reminds me about the sweetness of life. And again, my time at the stand has shown me that even in the midst of the average workday, all it takes is one banana and one conversation to truly bring out the value of another person. And that's why I believe we can shift the tide of this loneliness epidemic, and that is by socializing in such a sincere way that mutual values begin to fill the space of a person's social and personal need. Again, not on a large scale, but rather by leveraging our small and simple social interactions. Now, let's wrap this episode up and put a virtual bow on it. We started this podcast off with defining loneliness. And as a friendly reminder, loneliness is a distressing emotional state experienced when an individual perceives a discrepancy between their desired level of social connection and the actual quality of the social relationships. Again, it has nothing to do with the amount of people in your proximity. Rather, it's about your social needs not being met. From there, I spoke about loneliness as an epidemic and how it's not only increasing on a national and global scale, but its direct impact on our health and economy. Now, in an effort to contextualize our conversation behind loneliness, we leveraged Emile Durkheim's sociological theory of anomie. This theory suggests that whenever there is a rapid social or economic change, there will be a breakdown of values that guide a person's behavior. Because again, their value shifts from who they are to what they do. And Durkheim talks a little bit more about this in his work called The Division of Labor, where he suggests that this can easily lead to high emotions of unhappiness. Again, Durkheim's theory suggests that our feelings of loneliness can be attributed to the way that society is structured. Roles are streamlined, things are transactional, and the value really comes not from who you are, but from what you do. But that is where I want to shift the conversation. What if we didn't attach a person's value to their work, but simply to who they are? And at this point of the podcast, I brought up the story of the banana stand, where in the heart of Amazon headquarters lies a banana stand where both Amazonians and community members can come by and have a conversation. Now, out of the many stories that have come from me being a banista, the one thread that ties all of these experiences together is that every customer has something to offer. Whether it's a smile, a life lesson, a corny dad joke, or a million other presents, I quickly realized that every social interaction is a seed and that perhaps this could be the source of combating this epidemic of loneliness. And that's not by joining another run club or going to a large sporting event or even climbing the corporate ladder, but rather by embracing the small interactions in life from a place of authenticity. But I'm not just going to leave you guys with a social problem, a theory, and a cheeky story. Why not? Because we're problem solvers on this podcast. So here are a few tools that hopefully you can implement in your personal life. The first would be to stop lying to yourself. If we understand loneliness to be the discrepancy between a person's social needs and what they're currently experiencing, then truth telling is that pathway to filling that gap. So don't lie about your emotions. Don't become passive with what's valuable to you, and don't settle for any standard in a relationship. Number 2, remember that loneliness is a catalyst for greater fulfillment. If you're human, you are going to experience loneliness, and that is A-okay. I would say to leverage this time to reflect on your identity. What brings you joy? Was there a former friendship that went sour and has now tainted your perspective of trust? Or how do you want to become more kind? These are just examples of questions that I believe can turn into a moral compass to help you navigate life. Number 3, know that you're valuable even if you're not seen. Again, your value does not come from anything external or materialistic. Rather, it comes from what you believe to be true about yourself and it being reflected in your actions. And number 4, which I'm kind of stealing this idea from our good old pal Aristotle, and that is to become a virtuous friend. Aristotle argues that perfect friendship is the friendship of men who are good and like in virtue. Now, those who wish well to their friends for their sake are most truly friends, for they do this by reason of their own nature and not incidentally. Therefore, the friendship lasts as long as they are good, and goodness is an enduring thing. So basically, Aristotle is arguing that when a person operates from a virtuous place, their actions raise the social standard of behavior. So if you need an even more simple version, remember the golden rule: treat others as you would like to be treated. And perhaps by adopting these tools, we can leverage every social interaction as a means to combat this silent epidemic of loneliness. So this week, make sure to ask a bold question or to answer a question honestly. Perhaps give a stranger a compliment or even ask a friend how you can best support them in this season. Because again, while these may seem basic, they are profound acts. And with that being said, thank you for tuning into this episode of Specimen the Sociologist. And I hope that you learned a wee bit more about loneliness and perhaps about yourself. So make sure to check out Bonhomie's Coffee, subscribe to this podcast, and explore ways on how you can sow into the vision of this platform. And until next time, have a powerful day.